Hey, everybody. Welcome to the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. Very excited for today's guest, Stephen Hassan. We will get to Stephen shortly. But first, thank you for tuning in today. We appreciate you listening. And we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll share some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please follow or subscribe to be notified every time we post a new episode. All right, let's bring on Stephen. He is an author and mental health professional who is considered one of the world's foremost experts on mind control and cults. He is the founder of the Freedom of Mind Resource Center, which provides training, consulting, and support to individuals who are struggling to leave or recover from a cult, and to families and organizations that are concerned about cult behaviors. He has been working in the field of relationship, group, and political cults for over 40 years. And it's a subject he knows about firsthand. At age 19, while a student at New York's Queens College, he was recruited into Myung Moon's Unification Church, where he spent over 2 years. His latest book is called The Cult of Trump. Stephen, welcome into the back room.
Thanks, Andy, for having me on.
I'm really excited to talk with you because cults and cultism is something that is really interesting, really fascinating to me. I've watched so many documentaries about cults. I have a friend who actually, you provided a blurb on his book jacket, Spencer Schneider.
Okay.
I've
Yeah.
known Spencer for 40 years. He's been on this podcast, and I got to know his story, which is kind of crazy. So we're in a place in America today where cultism is so much a part of our culture because of Trumpism. And of course, your book is The Cult of Trump. So I want to talk with you about that shortly. But I just want to sort of go back in time a little bit. You are not only one of the nation's top experts on cults, you yourself were in a cult. You were part of the Unification Church back in the 70s, Myung Moon's Unification Church. That occurred when you were a student at Queens College. That's when you were recruited. What was your life like before recruitment?
Sure. So conservative Jewish upbringing, two older sisters. My dad had a hardware business. He had been a professional musician, but he decided when he got married, he wanted to be more responsible and earn a living. And my mom was an art teacher. I was skipped 8th grade and was very interested in creative writing. I wrote poetry and short stories, liked women. I was kind of bookwormish because I like to read books. I like to learn. I was definitely not interested in switching religions or dropping out of college or turning my back on my family and friends, much less throwing out all my original poetry, which I did. And just to go back to your intro, I became a cult expert because of my experience, and I became a right-wing fascist. I came to believe the Jews needed to die in the Holocaust because they didn't accept Jesus, which was completely contrary to everything that I grew up with in values. I've been to Israel and Yad Vashem, and did an archaeological dig in the Negev desert for college credit. And I hated Richard Nixon, and I was in the last draft lottery to go to Vietnam and protested the Vietnam War. And then I get into the cult. My girlfriend had dumped me. These women were pretending to be students. They came to my table at the cafeteria between breaks between classes and flirted with me, and I thought I was going to get lucky. And I got out of the group 2.5 years later after a near fatal van crash due to sleep exhaustion. And
so let's just stop there for a second, because I'm really fascinated
Sure.
about the recruitment part.
Yep.
So we know that you had been dumped by your girlfriend, so that obviously, as a young man, probably took its toll emotionally.
19,
Yeah,
hormones,
God,
man.
if you're dumped by a girl at 19, it's like the end of the world, right?
Well, she was a model. She was pretty
Even worse.
special.
Uh-huh.
And she was just like, I don't want to see you anymore, with
Right.
no explanation. And it was like a big confusion.
Did you feel vulnerable or depressed or susceptible
Yeah, I
in
would
any
say
great way?
Yeah, I would say that I was hurt, and I wouldn't say I was depressed in the clinical sense, but I was definitely ready to meet someone else. So when three women were flirting and smiling and asking to share my table, and they were said they were students, which was a lie. And I bicycled cross country when I was 16, 6 feet tall. I used to pick up 100-pound bags of rock salt in my father's hardware store and stuff. So I was pretty cocky, I guess, where I didn't imagine anyone could brainwash me or make me do anything that I didn't want to do.
What was the technique for them to get past, hey, we're just three good-looking girls that you think we're flirting?
Lying was huge, and my father gave me bad advice from his time in the hardware store. He said, "Steve, you can tell when people are lying, their eyes are shifty." And these women were looking me straight in the eyes and smiling.
So you
And
thought they
so
were
that
just totally genuine.
I had no spidey sense that this was a bad thing at all.
Mm,
And it was typical recruitment because I went on to become a recruitment, using myself to recruit women in, and women recruited men in. And the term that was used was love bombing, giving effusive praise and you're so special. We want you to meet our friends. You're so cool. You're so smart,
mhm,
and those types of things. And they said, "Oh, we share a house with people from all over the world. Why don't you come over for dinner? It would be really fun to introduce you to our friends." And I wasn't doing anything that night. And so I said, "Sure, why not?" And again, it was not, we believe in a fat
mhm,
Korean billionaire being the Messiah, and you're going to give up your entire life and worship him as your true parent, and your parents are really satanic. And by the way, you'll be possessed by demons, a la Exorcist movie, which was part of my indoctrination, where I talk about the importance of phobias being installed in members' minds to
mhm.
rob them of the capacity for rational exiting of the group. And in my case, I was selected by some of the leaders as leadership material. So I got to have meetings with Moon and other top leaders. And um, so I got to be in the room as later Moon was talking about democracy being satanic and
Mhm.
how when we take power in America, we'll amend the Constitution and make it a capital offense for people to have sex outside of the unification, arranged marriages, and other, just totally fascist, crazy stuff. And I should also just jump, if you don't mind, Andy, to after January 6th, Trump gave a speech extolling the Moonies, how great they are, got 2 million bucks for it. Pence only got 550,000 for the same virtual event. And I should say Pompeo and Esper too
Mhm.
got paid to extol the Moonies. And people don't understand they own the Washington Times. Like they have been the media conduit for massive disinformation for decades. And the paper never made money for decades. And the Washington Post estimated there was some $2 billion over decades in the Washington Times. One has to go, who's paying for this? And like, what's the agenda here? Oh, it's conservative paper. Ha ha ha. And they were saying it was Antifa attacking the Capitol buildings.
It's
Space.
unbelievable. I've heard you say before that smart people also join cults.
This social psychology talks about the fundamental attribution error, which is a universal bias. When people are trying to understand other people, they tend to over attribute personality and disposition and underestimate social influence
Mhm,
processes. So, the other way of saying it is we're human beings, we're social,
mhm.
and information matters, and we can trust untrustworthy people, and our minds can be hacked.
So how does a smart guy from a conservative Jewish family, because I asked this as a Jew myself, sitting in
Hmm.
a room with two other Jews, I'm assuming that you identified with your family's
Yeah.
religious beliefs. How does that young kid get to Jews deserve to die in the Holocaust? Help explain that point where you are just in hook, line, and sinker, and logic no longer matters.
So it was a process, and I will say that I believe that sleep deprivation is a big factor, social manipulation and control is a big factor. I created a model that I refer to as the bite model of
Mm-hmm.
authoritarian control that kind of does a laundry list of behavior control variables, information control,
Mm-hmm.
thought control, and emotional
Emotions. Uh-huh.
control
Mm-hmm.
variables. But in my story, I basically was meeting these people. They invited me over for dinner. Then they started the heavy pressure. We're going away this weekend. Come on with us. It's going to be so much fun. And my reaction was, I work as a banquet waiter at the Holiday Inn in Hempstead. That's how I make my money as a college student. I'm not free on weekends. Sorry. And but please, it's going to be so great. And I'm like, I'm sorry, this is, I need gas money, and this is, this is how I pay my bills. And it just so happened that 3 days later, I would always call to say, because they would do weddings and bar mitzvahs and other events, so it would be different each weekend. But my boss said, "Oh, they canceled the weekend, the wedding. Take the weekend off
Wow.
that very weekend." So it was one of those, that's weird.
Fate.
And well, they invited me. Maybe I should go
Mm-hmm.
because I'm not doing anything now. So, and then when I went with them in their van, big mistake. I left my car at their house and I went somewhere I didn't know where I was going. This was way before cell phones were invented, I might add. This was February of 1974. By the way, Andy, the same month Patty Hearst was kidnapped by the
Mm.
Symbionese Liberation Army at gunpoint, I got deceptively recruited. So we're driving in a van through this multi-million-dollar estate in Tarrytown, New York. And the person at the front of the van says, "Oh, by the way, this weekend we're having a joint workshop with the Unification Church." And I immediately said, "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa." No one said anything about a workshop. Nobody said anything about a church. I'm Jewish. I'm not interested. I want to go back to Queens. Yeah, and then they did the typical mind control technique where they turned it around on me. "Oh, what's the matter, Steve? Do you have an issue with Christians?"
Mm.
And try to make me feel guilty that I had that reaction. And it had been snowing. It was February. It was freezing cold. I didn't have a phone, didn't have my car. I'm like, I want to go back. Like, drive me now. And they were like, "We're not going back tonight. We'll go in the morning. Why don't you stay for the evening and we'll take you back in the morning?" And I thought, what are my options? I can scream and yell. I can get out of the van and start hitchhiking in the pitch black darkness and the freezing cold, or I'll stay the night. And of course, I didn't sleep a wink that night. And then when I woke up, I'm like, "Where's the van? I'm ready to go." "Oh, so sorry, it left.
Mm.
It'll be back later. Why don't you go have breakfast?" And it was this kind of incremental manipulation. But again, I didn't even dawn on me this is a cult or anything like that. Um, and I had asked the women the first meeting at Queens College, I said, "Are you part of a religious thing or anything?" And they said, "Oh, no, not at all. We're just students." So it wasn't in my mind. These people are systematically deceiving to manipulate me.
But it's
And
interesting
I
that
did.
that thought was in your head, though, that you were concerned enough to ask that question, but
I,
yet still got sucked
yep.
into it.
Yeah, I remember asking, "Are you part of some religious group?" And I can't tell you why I asked that question, but they were very congruent liars
Mm.
and were very convincing. And so the way the Moonies work is they want to capture your attention, surround you with other members, and they break you down, and then they start filling your mind up with some of their ideas. And the 3-day workshop, I didn't know it was a 3-day workshop till the end of the second day, when I'm like, it's Monday. Tomorrow I have classes. When are we going back to New York? And they're like, oh, how could you leave now? The most important day. Everything is leading to the crescendo of what's going to be today. You can't leave now, type of thing. And I remember the experience of feeling overloaded and confused. You know, the Led Zeppelin song "Dazed and Confused" comes to mind. But at the very end of the third day, the lecturer does the hypnotic, well, you've been hearing a lot of deep things this weekend, and maybe there's a part of you that thinks it's a bunch of rubbish. But on the other hand, what if, and they do it 3 times, what if it's true? Could you walk away?
Jesus, I'm almost hypnotized right now. Just
And I was
looking at you. I'm like, I'm not joining the cult, Stephen. Okay, whatever you're selling, I'm not buying.
But that was the last thing, and I'm telling that I gave a little bit of the voice tonality of what was done, because after that they had us breaking up into small groups where they were going to convince us to stay for the 7-day workshop the next morning. And I just got angry, and I'm like, I'm leaving. Let me out of here. I want to go home now. And, and they just tried their best. And the louder I got, the more they segregated me. And I'm like, I need to leave now.
So how does that anger, that concern, that fear, how does that get so repressed that you put all your guard down?
I'm a nice guy, but it was like, they kept delaying me, giving me BS stuff. At that point, I really felt like my mind was exploding. I needed to get the hell out of there. If anyone who's listening to this ever had a bad trip, it would be something like, oh my goodness, this is dangerous. I need to get out of here.
That's why I don't drop acid. I'd end up working for Trump or something crazy like that.
Well, so it turns out mind control scrambles your brain and really disconnects your critical faculties in your decision making. But the point is I got out of there. They brought me back to Queens. They tried me once again to talk to me. I got in my car and I got home, and my parents were like, "Where were you? We were so worried. It's not like you to tell us, to disappear and not say where you're going to be. Are you on drugs?" They said to me. I said, I don't think they gave me any drugs. My mom said, let's go talk to the rabbi. And I'm like, fine. But I wasn't interested in converting or joining a cult. I was just confused. But that thing about what if God is trying to save the planet
3 times.
And in Judaism, there is this notion of the Moshiach, that will bring peace on earth. We don't believe Jesus was that person for many reasons, but someone who's going to bring peace on earth. So I went to the rabbi, and he was clueless, thought I wanted to become a Christian, which I had no interest in doing. But that had been put inside my head. And I said this to Spencer, actually, going back to his cult experience. His cult was using another guru person named Gurdjieff and that material. And I had been reading that because my neighbor was into Gurdjieff. So I was reading one of Ouspensky's books, and I was sitting in my bedroom on my bed, and I picked up one of Ouspensky's book, and I opened it, and the paragraph that my eyes looked at talked about how there are cycles of history, and liberating people show up to help guide humanity. And my brain put those two things together, like, well, Gurdjieff's dead, maybe there is a Messiah coming. They didn't say anything about Moon, by the way. That was like not mentioned at all. Or a Korean, nope, just that the Messiah is going to come from the east somewhere. Anyway, um, yeah, my mind got hacked, buddy.
So do you
And
recall the moment where it all started to make sense to you what they were feeding you, and you started to question everything about your life up to that point? Like, did you know when you were in,
um,
when you got in?
well, so the appeal at the beginning isn't to commit your life. The appeal is to study more and learn more. But it was after that event in my bedroom that I thought maybe I need to learn more about this thing. So maybe I'll take this next weekend off and go back, and this time actually pay attention to what they're teaching. Because when I was there, it seemed childish. It seemed to be not make a lot of sense to me. There was a lot of ups and there was a lot of downs, and there was a lot of that kind of talking,
Mhm.
you know. But I knew nothing about hypnosis at that point. I've since become an expert in hypnosis along my journey of learning about social psychology and brainwashing and thought reform. But I'd say um, it was about 3 months in that I think that I committed
Mm.
to the group, and I had been separated from my family and friends. I had been surrounded by them. I was sleeping 3 to 4 hours a night, and what's so tricky, and Spencer would agree, the people, the other members are really nice and they're smart. Many are from Ivy League colleges and good professions. They're not stupid people, and um, there was hope that the planet was going to, get better than what was happening at the time.
At what point, 'cause you were in it for a couple of years, at what point did it stop making sense to you? Did you start thinking, this is not healthy, this is wrong, and I've got to get out?
Oh, so my story, which is longer than we can do here, is that I fell asleep at the wheel of a fundraising van in Baltimore, Maryland, drove into the back of a tractor trailer truck at 80 miles an hour.
Some people, by the way,
Uh,
fantasize about Trump doing that. I'm just throwing that out politically. So,
Yeah, he wouldn't drive himself. But in any case, I was rescued by emergency crews. They thought the van would blow up. I was in more pain than I'd ever felt in my life. And then I was in a hospital away from the cult for 2 weeks, sleeping.
mm,
And it was that I credit heavily. I wasn't having any doubts because I had a Mooney identity that was so fanatical that all of my real self was suppressed. But I did reach out to my sister, Thea. I have two older sisters, and Thea was the only person in my life that didn't try to talk me out of the group or say I was in a cult or say that I was brainwashed. She always just said, I don't understand and I miss you.
mm.
I want you in my life. So when that happened, when the accident happened and I was really messed up and I couldn't work for the group until my body healed, I called her and she said, I miss you. You have a nephew you haven't met yet. I want him to know his Uncle Stevie, which is how she, referred to me when I was very, very young. And I said, well, if you don't tell the parents, I can arrange for a visit because I was a leader. So I was able to arrange for a visit. Thankfully, she did tell my parents. They did hire some ex-Moonies, and they took my crutches away when I was sitting in her living room on her sofa and proceeded to say, we want to talk to you about the Moon organization. And I thought, Satan, Satan, get out of my way, Satan. And I didn't call into the group as prearranged, so they knew something was up. There was a lot of fear about deprogramming back in '70s. And then I kept asking to speak with my mom, who was always, a soft touch for her little boy, to manipulate. And I was going to, basically threaten that she'd never hear from me again if she didn't release me. And my father needed to get me out of my sister's house because the Moonies were coming to get me because they kept calling. And so he said, yeah, let's go see mom. So we got in the car. I was in the back seat with my leg across the back seat with my dad in the front driving and two of the ex-members in the front. And I'm driving on the Long Island Express. So you're from New York,
I grew up
Andy?
in Far Rockaway, so yeah, we're.
Far Walkway. I'm driving on the Long Island Expressway
Mhm.
from my sister's house, and we missed the exit for Utopia Parkway, which would have been to get to my parents' house where I was living. And my first thought was, my father lied to me. We're not going home. I need to kill him. And I thought about reaching over behind and snapping his neck in a moving car on the Long Island Expressway. And I remember thinking that for a good couple of minutes. And then I started thinking, but they would never break me. I'm a true disciple. Satan could never. This is a test. Satan could never get to me. Then my father drives to another location where the deprogramming is going to finish, can proceed. And I see these football player physique people walking to the car that are going to escort me to the new location. And my father's turned around, in the front seat. And I basically say to him, if you think you're going to make me go in there, I am going to be so violent, I will kill everybody, or you will have to kill me. And my blood will be on your hands. And my father looked me straight in the eye and he started to cry. I was like, gulp. Because that was a moment where my authentic self knew my father genuinely was worried about me. My cult self was like, he's been brainwashed by the communist media against father. But he said, how would you feel if it was your son, your only son, who drops out of college, quits his job, and joins a controversial group? And he has a tear running down his. And I put myself into his shoes and tried to imagine the 2.5 years, because they barely saw me for that period. And I came up with the equation. I would probably be doing what you're doing now. Not that I had any doubts or I wanted to leave, but I understood he had been brainwashed. So I said, probably I'd do what you're doing now. What do you want from me? And my father just said, I want you to listen with an open mind for the next few days. And then if you want to go back, I'll drive you there myself. But at least your mother and I will be able to sleep at night knowing we did the responsible thing.
Mm.
So for me, it became voluntary at that moment because I wanted to prove to them I wasn't in a cult and I wasn't brainwashed. I was that sure of my faith and my commitment and my knowledge of the ideology. And so I promised not to run away or call the police and that I would listen. So to answer your question, several days later, next to the last day, they were making parallels with Hitler. And I remember getting so angry at one point. I'm going to get loud for a second, a preparation for your listeners. I said, "Looters like Hitler, I've chosen to follow him and I'll follow him to the end." And then I had this thing go down my spine, but I still wasn't out. But there was something going on unconsciously that I would react saying I didn't care if Moon was like Hitler. So I still didn't have any conscious doubts, just that bodily
Hmm.
sensation after I got so angry. The last day was going to be finished, and the ex-members handed me one of Moon's speeches to congressmen and senators where they said, take a look at this. Tell us what you think, Steve. So I'm reading, and Moon is saying, I'm surprised that Americans could imagine that me, Reverend Moon, a Korean, could brainwash American youth. I respect Americans very much, and I am surprised that these accusations. I'm reading these words printed by the cult, and I have the first negative thought in 2.5 years. And I think, what a liar.
Mm.
Because I had heard him personally at least 100 times, talk about how pathetic Americans were and how dirty our minds were and how he needed to brainwash us. And as soon as I thought he's a liar, then I thought, well, then he's not trustworthy. And then I thought, then he couldn't be a man of God because the God we teach in the divine principle is a God of truth.
So it sounds
And
like
then I
it was
had
just one thread that needed to be pulled.
it was what was referred to back then as a snapping moment,
Mm.
which was part of the deprogramming model back then, was kind of like barrage the person till they crack kind of thing. Like I had a lot of information thrown at me that I was
Hmm.
blocking. It was very traumatizing, I might add. But when I started having those doubts, it felt like I was in a dark room and somebody lifted the shades and the sun started coming in. And simultaneously, I felt like I was on a skyscraper and I was just falling. I wasn't hitting the bottom, but I just left the top of the apex of the skyscraper. I didn't know who I was or what I was doing. I was out of control and I just cried for 3 hours straight. It was
Back.
pretty traumatic, Andy.
Oh, I can imagine it was for not just you, but as a parent, as a grandparent, like I can't fathom having that kind of situation in my family, especially with one of my children. When you look back on those years, and even though you were young and impressionable and you got out, I mean, you got to look back and go, how did I ever get to a place where I could believe such nonsense, such
No,
horrible.
I've spent 47 years answering that question. I think I have my answers now of how it works,
Hmm.
and I might also add I became a licensed mental health counselor, and the methods got way more gentle and respectful and ethical. Those, not breaking any laws by holding people against their will.
So let's bring it into the modern day. Okay. We are living in an age of Trump. You wrote a book, The Cult of Trump. And a lot of us have thought Trumpism is cultism for years. So the signs seem obvious. The traits are there. Everything is there. The question becomes, with everything we know, how do people still look at some godlike figure that they've made in their brains who tells them all kinds of nonsense, who makes them do things against their own best interests, who cuts them off from family, who cuts them off from everything that they thought they valued? How does
Hmm.
that happen again? Because Trumpism is a cult, is it not?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So, what I want to say is that we live in an age of digital age with artificial intelligence. When I was recruited, it was very unsophisticated compared to what's happening now. And I can tell you, I was invited to an Aspen Institute invitation only meeting in the summer of 2015 to discuss how ISIS was recruiting online and being so effective, and how
Hmm.
the State Department counterterrorism, Rich Stengel was in the room, Madeleine Albright was in the room, a lot of luminaries were in the room, as well as Monica Biggert from Facebook and Scott Armstrong from Google were in the room discussing are they doing this? And there was a fellow who had been developed an AI system, open source AI system. This is 2015, who had been hired to track how ISIS does it. And he said to us, he said, think of STDs. And we look at each other like, sexually transmitted diseases? What are you talking about? He said, the more sex you have with someone who has syphilis, the more likely you are to contract it. He said, this is how ISIS is doing it. They meet people online. Maybe they're video gaming. Maybe they're on a dating website or whatever. And they find out information about them. And then they invite them to come off the platform and have meetings. And then they swarm, which is a version of what happened to me of love bombing. It's called swarming. But this guy showed us his system where he could monitor memes worldwide in real time in 20 different languages. And we were blown away at the sophistication of this hardware. Long story short, the US government never bought his stuff. And I said to him, there's a presidential election next year. Like, this is really powerful stuff. You can track a meme and you can divert a meme and you can know what everybody is doing. And he's like, yeah. And I said, so what are you going to do about the presidential election? He said, oh, Hillary's people only want to give us $10,000 a month. I can't pay my electricity bill for that. I said, oh, so I hope you're not going to go to the dark side, is what I said to him. And he said, I don't want to, but I have partners. And then he went dark. And then 2 years later, he sold his company, he said. And later we found out about Cambridge Analytica hacking Facebook, getting all this private data. And I'm sure I am in my heart of hearts that Trump or Putin or the Mercers, certainly, who put Bannon in place and Kelly and got a hold of this system, and it's just getting more and more sophisticated. And people are addicted to their smartphones and their platforms. So people are getting messages tailored to the 5,000 data points that have been collected on every voting American. And people are not educated to understand how much we're being manipulated unconsciously by nefarious agents. That's how people are getting into radicalization and are still in the Trump cult today, in my opinion.
So speaking of nefarious agents, let's talk about Trump. What is his special sauce? What is it about him? Why is he so desirable, so attractive, so godlike? Why is he the Messiah to these people?
So that's a good question. When I was asked by my book agent to do this book, and it was published by Simon & Schuster, all I knew when I agreed to the assignment was that Trump was a malignant narcissist, and that was the stereotypical profile of every cult leader I'd ever studied. And that's a term that Erich Fromm in the 40s coined about not just the narcissism, but the thinking you're above the law, the pathological lying, the sadistic, the paranoid, or the whole list, which is on my freedomofmind.com website. And indeed, I did a chapter comparing him with Moon and Hubbard of Scientology and Jim Jones. But what I realized as I was researching the book is that the cult is comprised of authoritarian cults, many of which are religious cults. And the biggest one, in chapter 7, I talk about the family that Jeffrey Charlotte has written 2 books about and a Netflix series called The Family. The Moonies were called The Family also. Many cults were. Opus Dei, which is a right-wing Catholic cult. But the biggest body of cult members in the United States is what we call New Apostolic Reformation churches and mega churches. The media has gotten this wrong by reporting that Christian evangelicals. These are mind control authoritarian cults where the leaders claim to be a prophet or an apostle. They get direct revelations from God, they claim. They speak in tongues, they claim. They cast out demons, they claim. They do faith healings. And they control behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions. And just as in the Moonies, I was convinced that Satan was the god of this world, and I couldn't trust anything outside of the bubble of following my leader, Moon. These people are following their prophet or apostles, and they're the ones who said Trump won the election in 2020. Mainstream media is lying. The Democrats are all traffickers and they pedophiles. And so they do thought stopping. They have phobias in their mind that if they leave. So the messaging that the mainstream media has been doing is counterproductive. And I would add, when people attacked me as a Moonie and said I was a moron or I was in a cult, it made my faith stronger.
Right.
I felt persecuted. And that's exactly what's happening. And I've been saying forever, saying family and friends need to reach out to their loved ones who've been radicalized, be warm, remind them of your relationship, and be curious and ask questions. Don't try to throw facts at them. Ask questions. And I'm using a lot of what worked in my deprogramming, like the emotionality. How would you feel if you were in my place? The switch perspective technique. And what worked for me eventually to get through was explaining Chinese communist brainwashing. And I didn't mention that when I was telling you my Hitler story, but that was before the Hitler story. We were going through Robert J. Lifton's 8 criteria in his 1961 book, interviewing people coming out of Mao's thought reform programs. And the Moonies did all of the 8 things. And it was like, this is odd because they're Satan and we're God. It still didn't connect. But the point is, talking to MAGA Trump cult members, talking about Chinese communist brainwashing and explaining BITE to them, or talking about pimps and traffickers and how they recruit, groom people, and indoctrinate them to become slaves. You can have a conversation and ask questions that parallel those cultic authoritarian situations with what they're in, because the parallels are astoundingly there. And the point is that you want to empower people to reality test. You don't want to try to persuade them that they were wrong.
I think it's one of those things that is, for many reasons, easier said than done. I mean, I just look at my own life. I have people in my life, in my family, that I've tried to have logical, just recently somebody said to me, Biden is destroying the world. And I said, okay, how? And it was like, well, I'm not going to argue with you. Like, it's not an argument. It's just explain.
So I care about you. You're intelligent. You're my uncle. You're my brother. Whatever. I really would like you to take a moment and think about it and explain it to me, because I'm prepared to change my mind and accept what you believe. That's another critical piece, is modeling open-mindedness and having a confidence in your ability to talk about these subjects without getting triggered and angry at the person. Look at these 50 videos, do the research. You say, pick one, let's watch it together. And then it'll be my turn to pick one, and we'll watch it together and discuss it. And we'll go back and forth, because all that matters is what's true.
It's true, and I agree with you 100%. I can only speak for myself, but I think like so many of us are just so exhausted by the last 9 years and are angry about what we've seen and experienced. And what you're suggesting just requires so much patience and empathy and compassion. And it's hard to have those things when you see people scaling the Capitol like Spider-Man and beating the shit out of cops and worshiping a guy like Trump. So if there was an all-star team of cult leaders, Sun Myung Moon, Charles Manson, David Koresh, Jim Jones, etc., is he in that group? Does he possess the classic qualities in your mind of a cult leader? Or is there something
Yeah,
different going on there?
malignant narcissist.
So it stems back to that.
Yeah, but understand Mark Burnett
Mm-hmm.
of the
Apprentice.
Survivors and Shark Tank.
Mm-hmm.
He's the head of media for the Seven Mountain Dominionism of this Christian right wing NAR cult that I was describing. And so Mark Burnett was grooming Trump in the public eye of believing he's a successful businessman and all of this other crap that he isn't. And I interviewed Craig Unger and Yuri Shvets, former KGB official. Craig wrote a book called American Compromise. And Yuri said, "Oh, we recruited Trump decades ago."
Mm.
And gave details of how he had been recruited by Russia. And the media doesn't want to talk about Russia. But think about it. Remember when in Helsinki when Trump was with Putin and
Sure.
said, "I trust him,
Right.
and I don't trust the
I don't know why
CIA
he
and the
would.
FBI and the home." Yeah, how come on.
But
Or
is it
when
that the
he
media
fired
doesn't?
Comey and he had a celebration in the Oval Office with only Russian media, wouldn't let American media in. Wasn't that a little tell?
Mm-hmm. But is it that the media doesn't talk about it, or they did talk about it, and so many people just don't care? So it's like pissing in the wind after
I
a while.
worry about corporate media and the whole model of selling advertising and not wanting to upset maybe advertisers or political parties that are spending a lot of money on ads. And this notion of like stirring up fear and anger to get people's paying attention to what is on their particular channel versus, you know what? We really need this is a mental health emergency on the planet, and authoritarians are understanding how to manipulate minds at a level that everyone else is like, And where some of us are going, we have no data protection. People can hack our choices and put it in the dark web and sell it to third parties to manipulate our minds. That's the world we're living in right now. And to go back to your earlier comment, I'm tired too. Like it's tiring to face this, but what's the option?
Right.
To say well, let someone else do it. It's like, no, we're in an emergency on the planet right now. It's
Well,
burning up.
it is an
The
emergency,
planet.
and the cult of Trump is an emergency. It's an existential crisis that we saw how close we came in 2022 to the end of this experiment. But, the thing about cults, with the exception of the Moonies, which seems to have a model that works differently than the rest, it never seems to end well for the cult, whether it's the Manson gang or Jonestown or the Branch Davidians with Koresh. It never ends well. How is it going to be different, or will it be any different with Trump and Trumpism? Is Trump and Trumpism the Mooney model, which has long-term sustainability, or is Trump and Trumpism going to burn down like the Branch Davidian headquarters eventually? Is everybody going to take the cyanide or the equivalent of, metaphorically?
No, I think what they want is chaos and civil war. Putin wants Americans to kill each other, and so do the white nationalists, neo-Nazis, etc., the homophobes. And so I think there's going to be a lot of violence, and it really remains to be seen whether or not people who care about human rights and care about rule of law are going to prevail. And I don't think there's an option but to do everything in my power to make sure we don't fail and to warn people. But there's no way to help resolve this without educating the public at scale about how to tell the difference between ethical influence and unethical influence, and what's a healthy religious group and what's an authoritarian cult, and to explain phobias and how to cure phobias, and doing inoculation.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a course on my website to train mental health professionals and to help ex-members and families who are trying to rescue somebody, to educate them and to mobilize the millions of former cult members that are currently in the United States. There are millions of us,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot of people are still stigmatized and feel ashamed to say, yeah. Like, I love Spencer. He's like, yeah, I'm an attorney and I was in a cult for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I gave a lot of money and a lot of my time and energy to
Yep.
the secretive cult. The more of us that speak up, we can destigmatize it, we can normalize it, and we can use it as an opportunity to educate everyone else to say, hey, and this other piece about AI and the digital world is critical to understand, because we're not seeing the same news.
Mm-hmm.
It's getting sculpted via AI through whatever platform we're watching through.
And also, it seems like when you look back on famous cults, Heaven's Gate, whatever, just pick your poison. In each of those cases, there was consensus, unity, and a concerted effort by media, by law enforcement, by government to crack down on these groups. Where Trumpism is different today is that government seems part of the cult.
Yeah.
Media, corporate media you mentioned, media seems part of the cult.
Yep.
It's like, how does
It's orchestrated.
it is orchestrated
by billionaire authoritarians. And I really blame the fossil fuel countries and corporations for being major actors in this, who are buying off politicians and distracting everyone from the fact that we need to do an emergency global climate crisis shift and get away from fossil fuels, because we're killing our habitat. And so, they have this mentality somehow that greed is going to be a good thing, and somehow they're not going to suffer the effects of the planet,
Yeah.
heating up,
Seems like the
and
poison
fish
is
being
just
inedible.
it's where we are today. To me, just seems so complex, and there's so many different parties involved, and that's what makes it really frightening. This has been a really fascinating conversation. I have gotten to maybe 10% of my notes, so you are definitely going to have to come back on. But I want to ask you a question, which I can guarantee you no one else has ever asked you.
Okay, I'm ready. Drum roll.
We here in the back room like to get a window into people's souls, and there's not a better way to do that than music. You mentioned Led Zeppelin before, so I want to know your top 5 musical artists of all time.
Well, my wife and I met at Johnny D's in Somerville for a band called Beetlejuice, which is a Beatles cover band, because we both are major Beatles fans.
Me
So
too.
they're
There you go. Bingo.
very
Finally.
high up
Mm-hmm.
in my list.
That's
I
one.
also grew up on Peter, Paul, and Mary,
All right. That's
and
2.
they still have a very strong, deep connection to my heart. I love Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young.
3. 2 more. You
I
mentioned Zeppelin
love
before. Are they in the top 5?
I love Zeppelin. I love Eric Clapton. I love the Allman Brothers.
So you're a classic rock guy.
Classic rock. It's true. I
Mhm.
do listen to a lot of classic rock. If we're going to name me, I have Love Me Do on my ringtone on my phone. That's how am I doing?
I
Is
think
there anyone
you did
else?
5. You did good. And
Yeah.
I agree with you
Now,
all the way.
I do want to say, music and art are universal things that are human, that can go past the brain and the fear thing. Singing songs together is just a great feeling. And I just think it's a wonderfully important thing to the human experience.
It worked very well for Charlie Manson. Music.
It's my friend John Atak's working on a book on Charlie Manson, because he realized that a lot of Charlie's stuff is from Scientology. He got all kinds of documents.
But it's also music too. He really effectively, it was a part of who he was, but he really knew how to use music
Beach
and
Boys,
drugs, you know.
and Neil Young apparently met
Yeah.
Charlie
Yeah.
Manson. Well, don't forget David Koresh wanted to be a big rock star too.
And I just found out recently that
Wannabe.
Axl Rose on the 1992 Guns N' Roses album sang a Charles Manson song, Your Game Girl or whatever, on the album. That was so disturbing when I found that out. Stephen, thank you so much for coming on. This was really an eye-opener in so many ways.
Yeah, thanks. And I have a podcast too called The Influence Continuum. And last week I talked with a man who lived in China. And during the COVID protests, he shared that they had translated my bite model into Chinese. And they were walking around protesting the COVID lockdown with blank white pieces of paper because they didn't want to get arrested. It was called the White Paper Movement. But behind the scenes, people were learning about authoritarian mind control in China, which was very uplifting.
Well, that's good to know. I look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg and co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander, and our logo was designed by Cricket Langell. And special thanks to Patricia Wynn. If you like what we're doing here, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards. Have a great week.